was founded by the Communist Party in order to exploit racial divisions in the United States for its own revolutionary purposes. Remember, Bernie Sanders just stated that he is not a capitalist and he wants a social revolution or political revolution. The Standard Party line by ACP, FB, and by CPUSA, that's the Communist Party USA, was that America was rife with a racism that had been completely abolished by Stalin's USSR, an absurd thesis that Frank himself advanced in his columns. It's also quite absurd that every photo reel and video that I see of Russia, you see absolutely no black people, and yet Paul Robeson and Frank Marshall Davis had kept saying that they had solved the racial problems in the Soviet Union and that America had not. It is astounding that Frank Marshall Davis would choose to remain with the Communist Front, ACP-FB, so late in life is very revealing. And yet there was Frank's name on the letterhead. In February 1979, right alongside old Communist Party hacks like Abe Feinglass and social justice pastors like William Howard Milish. This was just before Barack Obama headed off to college at Occidental, and as we shall see, not without Frank's input. There are some remarkable similarities between the ideas of Frank Marshall Davis's columns and the political actions and thinking of Barack Obama. Let's take a look at a few. For Frank Marshall Davis, he rejected and blasted Winston Churchill. He vilified and targeted General Motors, a company that he would have been thrilled to nationalize. He advocated wealth redistribution from, in his words, greedy corporations to health insurance and public works projects. He favored taxpayer funding of universal health care, supported government stimulus and trumpeted the public sector over the private sector, and he constantly bashed Wall Street. Frank marched in May Day parades, dismissed traditional notions of American exceptionalism, and framed America not as selflessly serving the post-World War II world, but instead as selfishly flaunting its so-called mountainous ego and racist, imperialist, colonialist ambitions. He warned God and gun-clinging Americans about huckster preachers and instead sought the political support of the social justice religious left for various causes and campaigns. He perceived the Catholic Church as an obstacle to his vision for the state, and he confidently declared certain government actions constitutional or unconstitutional. Frank excoriated the tentacles of big business, bankers, big oil, excess profits, corporate fat cats, and their fat contracts, millionaires, rich men, and the wealthy. He attacked GOP tax cuts that spare the rich and that only benefit millionaires. He singled out the corporation executive for not paying his fair share. Used slogans such as change and forward. The list goes on and on. This is merely a sample. The list bears an uncanny resemblance to Obama's words and actions. Frank preached a mantra of change, which he pushed in his very first column for the inaugural edition of his Chicago Star, that is the Red Star. Among the forms of change pushed by the Star's contributors was the socialized medicine championed by Senator Claude Red Pepper, a Democrat from Florida. Pepper's landmark, albeit failed healthcare legislation, was overseen by his chief of staff, Charles Kramer, who we now know was a Soviet agent, one of several who contributed to the Star. With Frank, Pepper was one of the leading contributors to the Star's op-ed page, along with Howard Fast, winner of the 1953 Stalin Prize. One can even discern a lasting impression in Frank's comments disparaging the American way, which were recalled by Obama in Dreams from My Father. Given the fact that we look into the most personal details of candidates' lives, from their bedroom to their taxes, it is absurd to think that looking into someone who was clearly influential in our president's life could somehow be seen as off limits or not important. The people who influence our president matter and are certainly worthy of our scrutiny, especially given that it is open season on every area of Trump's life, and everyone is frantic about Russian advocacy and collusion. Radical influences on Barack Obama, from Jeremiah Wright to Bill Ayers, have gotten plenty of attention over the years. Questions about those influences have been so prominent that they were raised during presidential debates, with Obama forced to explain the relationship. In one debate during the Democratic primary, Hillary Clinton raised the Ayers issue, and even the New York Times gave the Obama-Ayers relationship front page treatment. But neither Wright nor Ayers, by Obama's own accounting, had an influence approximating that of Frank Marshall Davis. One interesting and important side note is that Frank and the Obama family shared an unlikely geographical path. Frank moved from Kansas to Chicago and then on to Honolulu. Barack Obama's family lived in Kansas before moving to Honolulu and then on to Chicago. Obama's mother, Ann, was born in Kansas in 1942 and died in Honolulu in 1995. Frank was born in Kansas in 1905 and died in Honolulu in 1987. Stanley Dunham was the interconnector linking these remarkable coincidental parts together. Both Stanley and Frank grew up in Kansas in the 1920s. And if you did not know, Stanley Dunham is Barack Obama's grandfather that introduced Barack to Frank Marshall Davis and asked Frank to be his mentor. All right, so we have Obama confirming that he had a relationship with Frank Marshall Davis. We have given you a brief overview of Frank Marshall Davis's beliefs, principles, and ideology that he held dear. And now we are going to review independent verification from a diversity of media sources that confirm what type of influence Frank Marshall Davis had on Obama. So the Associated Press in August of 2008 called Frank Marshall Davis an important influence on Obama, one whom Obama looked to not merely for advice on living, but as a father figure. Frank was there when Obama struggled to find mentors. It is important to note here that Obama was abandoned by his mother and father and was being raised by his grandparents. The Associated Press also said that Frank was an intriguing figure whom Obama sought in lieu of a father he hardly knew, handpicked by Obama's maternal grandfather for that purpose. The London Telegraph stated, Frank was an early influence and form of counsel to whom Obama gravitated at moments of doubt. The New York Times stated Obama took refuge in him. The Columbia-educated professor Dr. Gerald Horne, a man of the far left who has studied both Frank and Obama and who has written extensively on this period in Hawaii, stated that Frank was a decisive influence in helping Obama find his present identity. David Remnick, Pulitzer Prize winner, who has written for both the Washington Post and New Yorker, who was author of The Bridge, the definitive biography of Barack Obama, quotes Dawana Weatherly Williams, Frank Marshall Davis's next-door neighbor and dear friend. Weatherly Williams was so close to Davis that she called him Daddy, and was actually present the first time Obama and Frank met in the early 1970s. She described the Davis-Obama relationship as very influential, with Frank affecting Obama on social justice, on life, on what's important, and on no less than how to use his heart and mind. The clip I played for you earlier, Barack Obama refers to Frank Marshall Davis as a poet. So I'd like to talk a little bit about what Frank Marshall Davis wrote about. Frank wrote a quasi-pornographic biography described by some as a memoir, a novel called Sex Rebel. Under an alias Bob Green, Bob's sexual exploits from bisexuality to seducing barely legal teenage girls, a 13-year-old named Annie, which is pedophilia and sexual assault. Frank's own memoirs, Living the Blues, conceded his authorship of Sex Rebel. He happily admitted it, stating that he could not truthfully deny that this book, which came out in 1968 as a Greenleaf classic, was mine. The only question is to what extent the exploits are imagined or real. Dr. Catherine Takara, University of Hawaii professor of ethnic and black studies, a Frank Marshall Davis biographer who knew Davis for 15 years. Davis spoke to her classes, and she often visited with him, discussing his life and current news and events. They were so close that Frank spoke of her the day he died. Takara's colleagues described her biography of Frank as brilliant, wonderful, masterful, compelling, painstaking, poignant, astute, insightful, and important. Takara raved about Frank, commending his dedication to social justice and his work as a catalyst for change. Takara said that Frank and Obama's grandfather were closest friends, and that Frank nurtured a sense of possibility in Obama. This, Takara said, is evident in the way that Barack Obama carries himself, walks, and talks. She states that Frank handed on to Obama a sense of believing that change can happen. Given that change became the one-word mantra of Barack Obama and the entire Obama political movement, this is no small statement. The very title of the Obama team's 2008 campaign book was Change We Can Believe In, words that precisely echo Takara's description of Frank's influence on Obama. This suggests a consequential influence not only on Obama and his election, but on America itself. That belief in change and making change happen has, for better or worse, changed a nation forever. Speaking of which, the innumerable deferential books that were rushed out to help elect Obama president in 2008 contained frequent, warm references about Frank's mentorship. These highly sympathetic liberals seemed unaware of the literal red flags posed by mentoring Frank. Garen Thomas's book, Yes We Can, a biography of Barack Obama, stated, Barack looked to Frank for some hint of whom he should become as an adult. It is ironic, and I am sure that Thomas, given his support of Obama, did not intend this. But that statement alone provides plenty of support for the idea that the public deserves to know much more about Frank Marshall Davis. A tribute book by Ron Jacobs titled Obamaland, Who is Barack Obama? A loving, large, glossy, photo-filled book. It includes more than 30 Hawaiian natives as contributors. He provides a well-detailed look at Obama from an on-the-ground Hawaiian perspective, replete with arguably more facts on Obama's Hawaiian years than any other work. Jacobs calls Obama the most heralded person in world history, who leads America and the world into brighter and more peaceful times. As for Obama's influences, Jacobs pictures, literally, Frank Marshall Davis first. There is little doubt that young Barack Obama's notions of black manhood were nurtured by Frank Marshall Davis,
writes Jacobs. Old Frank